I always saw myself as a man of reason. I grew up believing that everything could be explained by numbers, chemical reactions, and the laws of physics. To me, God was just a convenient creation, something invented to comfort those who couldn't handle life's randomness. I spent years inside laboratories, surrounded by test tubes, microscopes, and theories. The smell of alcohol and hot metal was more familiar to me than that of any church. I used to laugh at people who talked about faith. I thought it was a waste of time. My world was made of solid certainties, of proven formulas. But deep down, there was an emptiness I pretended not to notice. Sometimes, when silence took over the lab at night, an anguish would visit me. That feeling that something greater existed, even if I refused to admit it. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday. I was preparing a series of tests involving highly flammable compounds. It was the kind of work that required absolute focus, and I took pride in that. I liked being in control, always in command. But that day, something felt off. An intern had made a small mistake in the previous calculation, and out of pride, I refused to double-check it. I know what I'm doing, I told myself. I remember the blue flame of the Bunsen burner flickering differently, taller, almost alive. Within seconds, the dry sound of an explosion filled the air. It was as if the ground had vanished beneath my feet. When I regained consciousness, the scene was pure destruction. Flames were devouring the benches, shattered glass sparkled like stars on the floor. I tried to move, but a metal beam was crushing my leg. The pain was unbearable. The heat made the air feel like liquid. Coughing, covered in soot, I realized I was trapped, and alone. It was the first time in years that I felt true fear. Fear of dying. And it was strange because, in the middle of all that chaos, I realized how worthless my logic was. No formula could get me out of that hell. No calculation could stop the fire closing in. I started yelling for help, but smoke was filling my lungs. The roar of the flames was louder than my cries. My hands trembled as I tried to move the debris, but it was useless. Then, amid the crackling fire and collapsing structures, something inside me broke. For the first time since childhood, a word escaped my lips, and I didn't even know why. God. I said it without thinking, like calling out to an old friend I swore I'd never see again. And at that moment, something changed. A cool wave ran through my body, contrasting with the heat around me. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt a presence. Suddenly, the fire seemed to pull back, as if an invisible wall had formed. It happened so fast that I thought I was hallucinating. But there, in the middle of the smoke, something or someone moved. A bright, white light pierced through the flames. I blinked several times, thinking it was a reflection, an oxygen-deprived illusion. But that silhouette, it was clear. It walked calmly, serenely, as if the fire couldn't touch it. My heart started racing. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to understand. I wanted to believe. I didn't know if I was dreaming or awake. The fire was consuming everything around me, but that light walked steadily, moving through the chaos as if destruction itself respected its presence. At first, I thought it was a reflection, a trick of my eyes, maybe a result of the smoke. But with each step, the figure became clearer. It had no defined form, no face, just a human silhouette made of pure light. And strangely, I wasn't afraid. The pain in my crushed leg, the suffocating heat, the terror of dying, all of it felt distant. The air, once heavy, now carried a soft, indescribable fragrance. It was as if life itself was returning to the room. And amid the agony, a new feeling arose, peace. I tried to speak, but my voice barely came out. All I could do was cry. Tears streamed down, mixing with the soot. None of it made any sense, and yet I knew it was real. It was as if a forgotten part of my soul had awakened. The glowing figure came closer until it stood right before me, and for a moment, everything went silent. No crackling, no roaring. Time stopped. And there, without words, something inside me understood. It was as if that light said, "You're not alone." I had never felt anything like it. No experiment, no scientific discovery, no professional recognition could compare to that presence. It was a living force, indescribable, the presence of God. I tried to reach out, but I realized it wasn't just a physical gesture. It was a gesture of the soul. It was a movement of surrender, a silent plea for help. And somehow the light answered. I felt a different warmth flow through me, but it wasn't the heat of the flames, it was the warmth of something pure, restorative. My heartbeat slowed, the pain eased. And when I realized it, the beam on my leg no longer felt so heavy. I swear I heard a crack, as if something shifted, and I was able to move. I crawled a few meters until I leaned against a partially destroyed wall. The fire still burned, but not a single inch of the area where I was had been consumed. That's when, for the first time, a word made sense to me: deliverance. It was a miracle, and I knew it. There was no other explanation. The science I had worshipped couldn't explain what was happening to me. I, the man of formulas, was standing before the impossible, and the impossible had a name: Jesus. I whispered that name, hesitant, almost as if apologizing for having doubted so much. But when I did, something inside me collapsed. The weight of pride, arrogance, self-sufficiency, it all came crashing down. I cried like a child, and between sobs, all I could say was, "Thank you." I don't know how much time had passed before the firefighters found me. I remember the shouting outside, the sound of axes striking, the smell of water hitting the flames. When they finally broke through, they looked at me as if they were seeing a ghost. "My God, he's alive!" one of them shouted. Later, at the hospital, I overheard something that sent chills down my spine. The center of the fire, the exact spot where I had been, was completely untouched. No flames, no soot, no damage. Just the floor marked by a clean circle, as if the fire itself had bowed down there. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to understand. I just wanted to believe. At the hospital, surrounded by machines, alarms, and the smell of disinfectant, I finally had time to think. Everything I had believed in had been challenged in a brutal, undeniable way. That experience wasn't just an accident. It was a calling. No matter how much my scientific mind tried to find logical explanations, nothing fit. The idea of coincidence simply couldn't hold up against what I had witnessed. That moment, that light cutting through the flames, had touched something deeper within me. A feeling I had never known before: faith. And not an abstract, intellectual faith, but a living, breathing faith that made me feel safe even in the face of death. Over the following days, amid doctors, tests, and healing scars, I began to notice small changes in myself. Before, my life revolved around results, proof, and validation. Now, every breath felt like a gift. Every look, every gesture from those around me, every smile carried a meaning I had never noticed before. I started reflecting on the purpose of my existence. Why had I been spared? What was the reason behind such a clear and undeniable deliverance? My rational mind still tried to escape into theories, but my heart already knew the answer. My life needed transformation. There was something greater, something I didn't yet fully understand, but it was already surrounding me with a powerful force. The first steps toward that change weren't easy. My fellow scientists looked at me strangely. I talked about God's presence, about miracles, and I could see their discomfort. I felt ashamed of my past disbelief. But at the same time, there was immense relief. I no longer had to wear the mask of absolute reason. I started praying. At first, with simple words, barely knowing what to say. But each prayer brought me a new kind of peace, something no scientific discovery had ever given me. It was as if every word built a bridge connecting me to what I had always denied, but now felt with overwhelming clarity: the presence of Jesus in my life. It was during this time that I realized how faith can transform even the smallest decisions of everyday life. Before, I focused only on experiments, results, and publications. Now, every choice, every action carried intention. I began to value people more, the life around me, and even the challenges that once frustrated me. Everything seemed to have a purpose. It was as if God had redrawn my inner world. The accident, which could have been the end, became a beginning. And each time I remembered that luminous silhouette in the fire, I felt more certain that my life was no longer under my control, but under divine care that I finally recognized. Even with all this inner transformation, there were still questions without immediate answers. Why me, a hardened skeptic, had been chosen for such a miracle? What was expected of me now? Those questions stayed with me, unsettled me, and at the same time, drove me to seek more. Every memory of the fire and the light pushed me to open my heart and let faith guide my steps. And that's how, between doubts and small revelations, I began to understand that my life would never be the same, and that this supernatural experience wasn't an ending, but the beginning of something greater, unfolding little by little each day. With time, I began to realize that the deliverance I experienced wasn't just an isolated event, but a calling to something greater. I hadn't survived just to keep living, but to live differently. Every morning after the accident became a chance to reflect on my purpose. Before, my life had revolved around work, science, and control. Now, I could see that everything was connected to a bigger plan, and that every act, from a simple gesture of kindness to the decision to share my story, carried meaning. Jesus had shown me that even the improbable could be used for transformation. My scientific mind still tried to rationalize it, but faith began to become the lens through which I saw everything. I started noticing signs I used to ignore. A smile from someone in the hospital hallway, a nurse's dedication, small everyday miracles that only make sense to those who choose to see with their hearts. I realized that life isn't just about surviving, it's about recognizing and responding to those signs. Every detail started to matter. God's presence wasn't just an idea, it was tangible, subtle, yet powerful. Something that filled the emptiness I had carried for decades. One of the deepest changes was seeing how inner transformation affects relationships. My family and friends noticed the difference. Before, I was cold, pragmatic, distant. Now, I was more open, more present. I started listening more, truly caring, valuing the presence of those around me. It didn't happen overnight, but each day I experienced the miracle of change. Small actions, like simply listening without judgment, became acts of faith and gratitude. The accident and the deliverance had planted a seed in me that was now growing with every conscious choice. The awakening of purpose also led me to reflect on the mistakes of my past. Every decision driven by pride, every moment of disbelief, every missed opportunity for faith now carried new meaning. I understood that Jesus hadn't just spared me from physical death. He had given me the chance to be reborn spiritually. And that required action. Faith, I learned, isn't just believing, it's living according to that belief. Every step, every choice became guided by this newfound awareness. The transformation was in motion, and I could no longer ignore it. And even with all these revelations, one restlessness remained. There was something more, something I hadn't yet fully understood. A persistent feeling told me that my miracle wasn't over, that life still had greater plans for me. Every time I remembered that luminous silhouette moving through the fire, I felt an expectancy, a silent calling to move forward, to live not for science or ego, but for faith, purpose, and the presence of God in every moment. Something greater was coming, and I knew I was only at the beginning of that journey. With each passing day, I realized how that deliverance had started a deep transformation within me. Before, I saw life as a sequence of predictable and controllable events, but now every moment seemed filled with meaning. Small gestures became great signs. The laughter of a child, the wind against the window, the smell of rain, all reminded me of God's presence. I felt that my life no longer belonged only to me, but to a greater purpose that needed to be recognized and lived out. Faith began to replace doubt, and that change wasn't just mental, it was visceral, touching every fiber of my being. At work, that transformation began to show as well. I continued in science, but something had changed. Before, every experiment aimed only at results, publications, personal glory. Now, every experience was an opportunity to see the miracle in the ordinary. I began to value life in every detail, from caring for my colleagues to being responsible with the environment and the organisms I studied. My scientific perspective was now joined with spiritual awareness, and I felt I had finally found the balance that had always eluded me. Every victory, every discovery carried deeper meaning, a way to recognize the presence of Jesus in my life. This inner transformation also reflected in my personal choices. I started prioritizing relationships, dedicating more time to my family, listening more, and judging less. Before, logic and skepticism guided my decisions, but now there was a new compass, purpose. And that brought me a peace I had never known. Waking up in the morning was no longer about following a routine or handling tasks. It was about living with gratitude, recognizing every small miracle, and feeling that my life had been restored for something greater. Each day became a reminder of my second chance, an invitation to live in alignment with God's presence. Even so, change wasn't immediate or linear. There were moments of doubt, moments of temptation to fall back into old habits. But the memory of the fire, of the glowing silhouette, and of that unexplainable deliverance strengthened my faith. Every challenge became a chance to practice transformation, to prove that change wasn't just an emotion, but a concrete reality. With every obstacle I overcame, I could feel the hand of Jesus guiding me, showing me that nothing happened by chance, and that every step I took was now connected to a divine plan I was just beginning to understand. And even with all that transformation, a sense of mystery and anticipation remained. I knew that the supernatural experience in the lab had only been the beginning. There was something greater, something not yet fully revealed, something calling me to continue this journey of faith, purpose, and transformation. Life had plans beyond what my eyes could see, and each day was a silent invitation to dive deeper into that divine presence now guiding every part of my existence. After the accident, I realized that my life had become a constant stage for the presence of God. Before, I went through my days as if half asleep, completely absorbed in formulas and experiments, blind to the beauty around me. Now, every detail seemed filled with meaning, every breath a reminder that I had been spared to live differently. The simple act of opening my eyes each morning became a gift, and faith began to take root in every part of my daily life. I started to feel that there were no coincidences, that every situation, every person crossing my path, was there for a reason, guided by a greater hand. In the days that followed, I realized that God's presence didn't manifest only in great miracles or moments of danger. It was also in what I once considered trivial: a coworker's smile, a nurse's quiet dedication, the wind rustling the leaves of the tree outside the lab. Everything became a reminder of divine care and attention. I began to pray without even noticing, spontaneously, asking for guidance, giving thanks for small victories, recognizing Jesus' hand in every detail. Every moment became an opportunity for connection, and I felt my heart opening to a kind of gratitude I had never known before. At the same time, my faith began to shape me from within. The doubts that once haunted me started to lose their power before the conviction of what I had lived through. I no longer just believed in miracles. I saw them happening, reflected in daily life, in small decisions, in acts of compassion and kindness. I began to understand that living with faith doesn't mean the absence of challenges, but the awareness that we are never alone, even when everything seems lost. The presence of God became my guide, my anchor, and my motivation, showing me that every action could be a reflection of something greater. The impact of this awareness wasn't limited to my personal life. In the lab, my methods and decisions began to be shaped by this new perspective. I understood that every choice, every experiment, carried consequences not only scientific, but also human and spiritual. I started sharing this vision with colleagues and students, subtly, without imposing, but offering the possibility of seeing the world through a different lens. Some laughed, others ignored it, but for me, every opportunity to plant seeds of faith, hope, and purpose became part of my mission. Even with this constant presence, there was still something I couldn't fully explain. I felt that my journey was only beginning, that the miracle in the lab wasn't an ending, but a doorway. Each moment of peace, each perception of the divine presence, reminded me that transformation is ongoing, that faith must be nourished, that life holds purposes greater than any human logic. I knew that more challenges would come, but the certainty that Jesus was by my side made every obstacle bearable, and each day became an opportunity to live with fullness, gratitude, and surrender. After months of reflection and living through this transformation, one truth became clear to me. My life had been completely renewed. I was no longer the skeptical scientist who measured every step of existence with rules and formulas. Now, every choice carried purpose, every gesture had meaning, and each day was a chance to express the faith that had taken root within me. I realized that the accident and the deliverance weren't isolated events. They were direct invitations from Jesus for me to live with awareness, gratitude, and above all, the courage to share what I had received. That was when I understood the importance of testifying. The experience in the lab couldn't stay only with me. It was impossible not to speak, not to share the feeling of having witnessed something that transcends human understanding. I began to tell others about my miracle, about the luminous silhouette crossing the fire, about how God's presence completely changed my life. Every account, every conversation became a way to sow faith, to touch hearts, to show that miracles are real and that transformation is possible, even for those who, like me, doubted for years. I discovered that my mission now was to be a bridge, a living example that Jesus works even when no one believes. My routine changed completely. Before, life revolved around laboratories, results, and deadlines. Now, I integrated science and faith, reason and spirituality. My work gained a new meaning: to study the world without losing sight of the supernatural, to value human life, and to understand that every experience, every discovery, can become an instrument of transformation. I began to see with the eyes of purpose, recognizing that every person who crossed my path could be touched in some way. and that my survival and deliverance had been preparing me for this mission all along. Even with all this transformation, challenges still arose. There were moments of exhaustion, of doubt, of questioning the very value of my testimony. But faith, strengthened by the miracle, gave me endurance. I learned that God's presence isn't reserved only for desperate times, but for every second of life, and that sharing this experience is just as important as living it. Every story I told, every reflection I shared, strengthened not only my faith but also that of others. I discovered that miracles have a ripple effect. Touching one life can inspire others to believe, to surrender, to feel the presence of Jesus in a real and tangible way. Today, looking back, I see that the fire and the deliverance I experienced were more than an accident. They were the beginning of a life with purpose, of a transformation that reaches beyond the mind and touches the heart and soul. I am no longer the man who once laughed at faith. Now I live by it, share it, and find in every detail an opportunity to recognize miracles. And as I continue on this journey, I know my story is still being written, that there are more lessons, more encounters, more moments when God's presence will call me to act, to transform, and to believe.